My name is Diana Hartley. I'm 34. 3 months after my grandmother died, a bank called to tell me she'd been keeping a secret in my name since 1998, and what was inside that box destroyed every lie my mom had ever told about her. The day we cleaned out Grandma's house, my mother showed up with packing boxes and black trash bags. She walked through every room like she was shopping, the jewelry, the china, the photo albums, even the cardigan Grandma wore on the porch every evening. She took it all. And when I asked, just once, if I could keep Grandma's wedding ring, my mother looked at me in front of our entire family and said, "Grandma wanted me to have it all. You wouldn't know what to do with nice things anyway." Nobody said a word. I stood in that empty living room holding a cracked coffee mug, the only thing she didn't want. I didn't know then that my grandmother had been preparing for that exact moment for almost 30 years. Before I tell you what was in that box, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story earns it. And drop your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to a Saturday morning in January, the day we cleaned out Grandma's house. The house sat at the end of Jessamine Lane, a white clapboard two-bedroom with a wraparound porch and paint peeling at the eaves. My grandmother, Evelyn Marsh, had lived there for 41 years. She raised my mother in that house. She raised me in it too, at least the parts of me that mattered. I pulled into the gravel drive at 8:30, a half hour before anyone else was supposed to arrive. January cold, frost on the mailbox, dead leaves still clumped along the gutter where Grandma used to sweep every Thursday morning. I sat in my car with the engine running and stared at the porch. The rocking chair was still out. A clay pot with dead geraniums sat on the top step where Grandma had placed it last September, back when she still had the strength to garden. The welcome mat, faded green, slightly crooked, was the same one she'd had since I was in middle school. This house had a smell. Everyone's grandparents' house has a smell. Hers was lavender sachets and lemonwood polish and whatever was baking, usually cornbread or lemon squares. I could smell it from the driveway, through closed windows in January, or maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I'd been imagining it since November. The last time I'd been here, Grandma was still alive. A Sunday in November. I'd driven the 45 minutes from my apartment like I did every weekend, brought her soup from the deli she liked, and we sat on that porch even though it was too cold for it. She'd held my hand and squeezed it and said, "You were always the one who showed up, sweetheart." 11 days later, she was gone. Stroke in her sleep, 84 years old. Now it was January, 3 weeks past the funeral, and I was sitting in a driveway that still smelled like her lavender bushes, waiting for my family to come take whatever was left. A black SUV swung in behind me. New model, leather seats. My mother stepped out in a quilted vest and yoga pants, sunglasses pushed up on her head like she was arriving at brunch. She opened the tailgate and pulled out 2 flat-pack moving boxes and a roll of packing tape. She didn't bring cleaning supplies. She brought packing boxes. I watched her carry them up the steps without looking back, and something cold settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with January. By 9 o'clock, the driveway was full. Aunt Ruth arrived in her old Subaru with my cousin Tammy. A couple of second cousins drove in from Culpeper. Everyone wore coats and carried nothing. My mother had already gone inside. I heard drawers sliding open before I reached the hallway. In Grandma's bedroom, my mother was kneeling in front of the dresser, pulling velvet pouches and small boxes out of the top drawer and dropping them into a canvas tote bag she'd brought from the car. "Mom," I said, "can I keep Grandma's wedding ring? Grandpa gave her that." She didn't look up. "Honey, I'm her daughter. These are mine now. Mom told me before she passed. She wanted me to have everything." "She said that?" "She said that." My mother zipped the tote closed and stood up. "Diana, I don't have time for this. There's a whole house to go through." I looked past her at the hallway. Aunt Ruth was standing near the kitchen doorway. Our eyes met. Ruth glanced down at the floor. Tammy was in the living room wrapping newspaper around dishes. She kept wrapping. Nobody said anything. My mother brushed past me and headed for the china cabinet in the dining room. I heard her pulling plates off shelves. Grandma's Wedgwood. 40 years of collecting, piece by piece, at estate sales and antique shops across 3 counties. Mom, could I at least have a few of the plates? Grandma used to— You live in a 1-bedroom apartment, Diana. Where would you even put them? She said it loud enough for the whole house to hear. You wouldn't know what to do with fine jewelry anyway. You'd probably leave it in a desk drawer at school. Aunt Ruth turned away. I stood there, and I let her take it. By noon, the house was half empty. My mother had filled her SUV twice, driving loads back to her lake house 20 minutes away and returning each time with more boxes. The Wedgwood. Every single plate, cup, and saucer, wrapped in newspaper like she was running a moving company. The silverware set Grandma had used every Thanksgiving since before I was born. 3 framed watercolors Grandma had painted herself. Landscapes of the Blue Ridge she'd done in a community art class at the library. The quilt from the guest bedroom, the one Grandma's mother had stitched by hand. The photo albums, 4 thick leather-bound volumes spanning from the 1960s to the early 2000s. Every birthday, every Christmas, every awkward school picture of me from kindergarten through 12th grade. I asked about the albums. I'll make you copies sometime, she said. She was already taping a box shut. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was focused on the tape gun, running it across the cardboard in one smooth motion, like she'd done this before, like clearing out her dead mother's house was just another Saturday errand. The second cousins left around 11. They'd carried furniture to the curb for donation pickup and hadn't said much. This wasn't their fight, and they knew it. Tammy hugged me in the kitchen. I'm sorry, Diana. I don't know what to say. I nodded. There wasn't anything to say. What was left? A house full of dust marks where things used to be. Nail holes where frames had hung. The indent in the carpet where Grandma's recliner sat for 20 years. The kitchen smelled like lemon polish and emptiness. On the counter by the stove, I found Grandma's coffee mug. White ceramic with a thin blue stripe around the rim, chipped on the handle, stained dark inside from decades of morning coffee. My mother had walked right past it. I picked it up and held it with both hands, and for a second I could smell Folgers and lavender and the wood polish Grandma rubbed into her kitchen table every Sunday. I carried the mug to my car, sat behind the wheel, and cried, not the polite kind, but the kind where your whole chest folds in on itself and you can't breathe right. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Ruth. I'm sorry, honey. I should have said something. I told myself it was just stuff, that Grandma would want me to let it go. But stuff was all I had left of her. 2 weeks passed. I went back to my classroom at Millbrook Elementary. 3rd graders, spelling tests, reading circles, permission slips, the ordinary machinery of a life that pays $42,000 a year and asks you to love it anyway. I did love it. I loved my kids. I loved watching a 7-year-old sound out a word they'd never seen before and get it right. I loved the way they ran to me on Monday mornings like I'd been gone for a month. Teaching was the one thing in my life that made me feel competent, useful, necessary. My mother never understood that. She called it playing school once, at Thanksgiving, in front of the whole family. Grandma had squeezed my hand under the table, but at night, alone in my apartment, the grief hit different. I scrolled through the photos on my phone, the only pictures of Grandma I had left. Her on the porch, her at Christmas. A blurry shot of her laughing at something I said, taken 2 months before she died. 30 photos total. That was it. 4 decades of memories, and I had 30 pictures on a phone. I called my mother about the album copies. I've been so busy, Diana. You know I'm dealing with Mom's estate. Stop being so needy. The albums aren't part of the estate, Mom. They're family photos. Everything in that house is part of the estate, and I'm handling it. She hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and stared at Grandma's cracked mug sitting on the counter. The mug I drink from every morning now because it's the only thing I have. And I realized something. My mother wasn't just taking Grandma's belongings. She was rewriting the story. In her version, she was the devoted daughter. She was the one who sacrificed. She was the one Grandma trusted. And every time someone in the family repeated that story without questioning it, it became a little more true. Grandma's will was simple. The house would be sold and the proceeds split. But personal property, clothes, jewelry, furniture, photos? The will didn't specify. And my mother had walked into that gap like she owned it, which, as far as anyone knew, she did. The text came from Tammy on a Wednesday night. No greeting, just a link. And 5 words. Isn't this Grandma Evelyn's ring? I tapped the link. eBay. A listing for a vintage 1960s gold band, described as estate jewelry, excellent condition, engraved. The seller had posted 3 photos. I zoomed in on the last one. The inside of the band. E&R 1962. Evelyn and Robert. My grandparents' wedding ring. The listing said sold. Price, $1,800. I sat on the edge of my bed and felt something shift behind my ribs. A click, like a lock turning. I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. Did you sell Grandma's wedding ring? Silence. Then, what are you talking about? It's on eBay, Mom. I have the listing. E&R 1962. A long breath. So what? It's mine. I needed the money. You don't get to judge how I manage my finances. That wasn't yours to sell. Grandpa gave that to Grandma. Don't you dare tell me what was whose. I am her daughter. I hung up. My hands were steady. My voice had been steady. But inside, something had shifted permanently. That ring was on Grandpa Robert's hand when he died in 1996. Grandma wore it on a chain around her neck for 6 years after, until the chain got too heavy for her. She put it in her dresser, and my mother pulled it out of a velvet pouch and sold it to a stranger for $1,800. I found out later that Tammy didn't stumble onto that listing by accident. Aunt Ruth had asked her to keep an eye on things. Ruth was building a quiet record of everything my mother was doing. I didn't know that yet, but I was grateful. My mother called back the next morning, 6:15, before my alarm. If you keep this up, Diana, you won't have a mother either. I didn't answer. I gave up my life for that woman, 30 years of driving to that house, cooking, cleaning, holding her hand through every doctor's appointment. You showed up on weekends like a tourist. Don't pretend you cared more than me. I knew the truth. In the last 3 years of Grandma's life, I was there every Saturday. I cooked her meals for the week. I drove her to her cardiologist in Charlottesville, an hour and a half each way. I cleaned her gutters. I fixed her porch railing. I sat with her when she couldn't sleep. My mother came for Thanksgiving. Sometimes Easter. She called on Sundays. 15-minute calls where she talked about herself and asked Grandma if she needed anything, already knowing Grandma would say no. But my mother had told the family a different story for years, and everyone believed it because it was easier than looking closely. I'm not fighting with you, Mom, I said. Then stop acting like I did something wrong. You sold Grandpa's ring. It was mine. She hung up. I got out of bed, showered, made coffee in Grandma's cracked mug, drove to school, taught my 3rd graders about fractions and the water cycle and how to write a paragraph with a topic sentence. That night I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the mug for a long time. Grandma's handwriting was on the bottom. She'd written EM in permanent marker years ago so her mug wouldn't get mixed up at church socials. E.M. Evelyn Marsh. I went to bed, couldn't sleep, stared at the ceiling. At 7 the next morning my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Millbrook area code. I want to pause here for a moment. If you're watching this, and someone in your family has ever sold something that belonged to a person you loved, I understand that feeling. It's not about the money. It's never about the money. It's about respect. It's about what's sacred. If this story is hitting close to home, hit that like button so I know I'm not telling this alone. And stay with me. Because that phone call the next morning changed everything. Miss Hartley? This is Patricia Cole from First Heritage Bank in Millbrook. I was standing in my kitchen, still in my robe, the phone pressed to my ear. I'm calling regarding a safe deposit box that was leased under your name. I'm sorry? Under my name? Yes, ma'am. Box 1177. Leased under Diana R. Hartley. The original lease was established in March of 1998. 1998. I was 6 years old in 1998. The box was prepaid for 28 years, Patricia continued. The lease is set to expire this spring. We'd like to schedule an appointment for you to access the box before then. I sat down. Not on a chair, on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet, right below Grandma's mug. Who opened this box? The original lessee was Evelyn R. Marsh. She listed you as the sole authorized holder. Grandma. Did my mother know about this? Connie Hartley? A brief pause, keys clicking. Our records show only one authorized name on this account, Ms. Hartley, and that's yours. My hand was shaking. I pressed it flat against the cold tile. Can I come this Friday? Of course. We open at 9. Bring a valid photo ID. I hung up and sat there on my kitchen floor for a long time. The morning light moved across the wall. The coffee in Grandma's mug went cold. 1998, 28 years of rental fees, paid in advance. I tried to remember. 6 years old, summer. Grandma taking me to what I thought was just a boring errand. A building downtown. She bought me an ice cream cone and told me to wait in the lobby. She went through a door, came back 20 minutes later, squeezed my hand. We just did something important, sweetheart. Someday you'll understand. I never asked what she meant, and she never mentioned it again. That evening I called Aunt Ruth. I need to tell you something, I said. A bank called me today. Grandma opened a safe deposit box in my name in 1998. I didn't know about it until this morning. Ruth went quiet. I could hear her breathing. A clock ticking in the background. Then, softly, your grandmother was smarter than all of us, Diana. You knew? I didn't know the details. I didn't know about a box. But Evelyn told me once, years ago, she said, I made sure Diana is taken care of. Connie will never know. I leaned forward. When did she say that? It was after your grandfather died, 96, 97. Connie had asked your grandmother for money, $8,000, said she needed it for some emergency, car trouble or credit card debt, I don't remember exactly. Evelyn gave it to her. Connie never paid it back, never mentioned it again. Not a phone call, not a check in the mail, not even a thank you. Ruth paused. That's when something changed in your grandmother. She still loved Connie. Of course she did. But she stopped trusting her. And your grandmother? She was the kind of woman who, once she stopped trusting someone, she didn't waste time being angry about it. She made plans. I thought about that summer in 1998. Grandma leading me into a building downtown, buying me a vanilla cone from the shop next door, telling me to sit on the bench and eat it while she went through a glass door. Coming back 20 minutes later with that look on her face. Calm, certain, like she'd just balanced an account that had been bothering her for years. She squeezed my hand and smiled, and said we'd done something important, and I was too busy eating ice cream to ask what she meant. Ruth, what do you think is in the box? I don't know, sweetheart. But whatever it is, Evelyn wanted you to have it. She specifically wanted you. And she specifically did not want Connie anywhere near it. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the cracked mug. EM on the bottom. Permanent marker. The kind that doesn't wash off. Grandma had known something about my mother since before I started first grade. She'd known, and she'd planned, and she'd waited almost 3 decades. Friday was 2 days away. The next morning, Thursday, I did something I hadn't planned. I went through the small box of papers I'd taken from Grandma's house. Not the important ones. My mother had claimed anything that looked official. These were the scraps nobody wanted. Old utility bills, a 2014 calendar with dentist appointments circled, Christmas cards from people I didn't know. At the bottom, tucked inside a church bulletin from 2003, I found a business card. Gerald Fenn, attorney at law, Millbrook, Virginia, estate planning and trusts. The card was soft at the edges from years in a drawer. I turned it over. Nothing on the back. I searched the name on my phone. Gerald Fenn was still practicing. A small office on Main Street, 4 blocks from the bank. His website was plain, just a name, a phone number, and a list of services. Estate administration, wills, trusts. I called. A woman answered, warm voice, unhurried. Fenn and Associates, how can I help you? My name is Diana Hartley. My grandmother was Evelyn Marsh. I found Mr. Fenn's card in her. One moment, please. A click. Hold music. Then a man's voice, deep and measured. Ms. Hartley, I've been expecting your call. That stopped me. You have? Your grandmother was my client for over 20 years. She was a very careful woman. He paused. I understand you may have recently been contacted by First Heritage Bank. How did you know that? I can't discuss the specifics over the phone, but I'd like to meet with you after you visit the bank. Can you call me again on Friday afternoon? Yes. Good. Open the box first, Ms. Hartley. Then call me. Everything will make sense. He said goodbye. Professional. Unhurried. Like a man who had been waiting a long time for this particular phone call. Thursday evening. My phone lit up. Mom. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to listen. Diana, hi. Her voice was different, softer, almost sweet. I was thinking about last week. I know I was hard on you and I'm sorry. Why don't you come over this weekend? I'll make dinner. My mother had never once apologized to me. Not for the things she said at the house, not for selling the ring, not for any of it. That's nice of you, Mom. I'll think about it. Great. A pause. Then too casual. Hey, did Grandma ever mention anything to you? Any accounts, papers she might have had? There it was. What do you mean? Oh, nothing, just... I've been going through the estate paperwork and I want to make sure we got everything from the house. She might have had things I didn't know about. You know how she was, always squirreling things away. I kept my voice flat. I don't remember anything. Okay. Well, if you think of something, let me know. She paused again. You sure? No old envelopes? Bank statements? No, Mom. We said goodbye. I hung up and set the phone down and thought about it. Someone had told her something. Or she'd found something in Grandma's papers. Maybe a bank statement, a receipt for the annual box rental. Something that made her think there was more to find. My mother wasn't calling to apologize. She was fishing. I walked to the kitchen, picked up Grandma's mug, and held it for a moment. Then I set it back on the counter and said out loud, to no one, to Grandma, to the empty apartment. I'm going to that bank tomorrow, and I'm not telling her. But my mother moved first. Wednesday, 2 days before my bank appointment, she sent a group text to the family. Ruth, Tammy, the cousins from Culpeper, even Dale, my father, who'd been out of the picture since the divorce when I was 12. Family meeting at my house this Saturday. We need to discuss Mom's estate and finalize some things. Please come. I didn't know what she meant by finalize. I found out when I walked through her front door on Saturday morning and saw documents spread across her dining table. My mother had hired a lawyer, not Gerald Fenn, someone else, a man from Fredericksburg whose name I didn't recognize. The papers were printed on heavy stock, official-looking. The language was dense, but the gist was simple. The family would sign a consent agreement designating Connie Hartley as sole executor of Evelyn Marsh's estate, with full authority over the distribution of all personal property. Everything. Sole discretion. Ruth was already there, sitting in the corner of the living room with her arms crossed. Tammy sat beside her, reading the papers on her phone. Someone had texted her photos of them. My mother stood at the head of the dining table in a cream blouse, her reading glasses on, her hair freshly done. She'd prepared remarks. I could see index cards beside the documents. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice cracking just enough to sound emotional. "As you know, losing Mom has been the hardest thing I've ever gone through. 30 years I took care of her. 30 years. She dabbed her eye with a tissue. Tammy looked at me. Ruth stared at the wall. I hadn't told anyone about the bank, about Gerald Fenn, about Friday. I sat down and listened. "Why do you need us to sign anything?" I asked. "Grandma's will says the house gets sold and the proceeds split." My mother turned to me. The softness from Thursday's phone call was gone. "The house is one thing, Diana, but Mom's personal belongings are mine," she told me. "She also had a wedding ring that you sold on eBay." The room went silent. Ruth straightened in her chair. Tammy put down her phone. One of the Culpepper cousins, Gary, I think, looked up from the document he'd been reading. My mother's face flushed. A dark red from her neck to her cheekbones. She set her index cards down on the table. I saw her fingers tremble. And then she steadied herself and turned to face me fully. "Diana, you are a school teacher making $40,000 a year. You don't understand finances. You don't understand estate management." She gestured at the table, at the papers, at the room she'd staged like a boardroom. "You showed up on weekends and think that makes you special? I was there every day." Nobody corrected her. Nobody said, "Actually, Diana drove 45 minutes every Saturday for 3 years." Nobody said, "Connie, you came at Thanksgiving." I looked around the room. Gary was staring at the top of the table like he was trying to read the wood grain. His wife was gripping her coffee cup with both hands. Tammy's jaw was so tight I could see the muscle working below her ear. Ruth was gripping the arm of her chair hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. Because my mother had been telling her version for so long that it had hardened into something that felt like fact. And challenging it, in her house, at her table, in front of her audience, felt like stepping into traffic. She wasn't finished. She took a step toward me. Her voice dropped, and somehow that was worse than the yelling. "If Mom had wanted you to have anything, she would have said so. She didn't. Because she knew, just like I know, that you can't handle it." The room held its breath. Gary looked at the floor. Tammy's jaw was tight. Ruth was gripping the arm of her chair. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. "I memorized every face in this room," I said quietly. And I walked out. I drove home with the windows down, January air filling the car. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady on the wheel. Something had shifted. At the house cleanout, I cried. When I found the ring on eBay, something inside me cracked. But today, sitting at that table, hearing my mother say, "You can't handle it," in front of everyone, I didn't feel sad. I felt clear. If Mom had wanted you to have anything, she would have said so. I pulled into my parking lot and sat in the car. I looked at the dashboard. I looked at my phone. I thought about Grandma's voice on that last Sunday on the porch. "You were always the one who showed up, sweetheart." And I thought, "But she did say so, Mom. She just didn't tell you." Inside my apartment, I checked the calendar on my fridge. Friday, 10 a.m., First Heritage Bank, 2 days away. I picked up my phone and called Aunt Ruth. "I'm going to the bank on Friday," I said. "I'll tell you what I find. But after that, I might need you." Ruth didn't ask for details. She just said, "I'll be ready, sweetheart." I set the phone down, made dinner, graded spelling tests, watched the news for 20 minutes without hearing a word of it. That night I couldn't sleep. But for the first time in months, it wasn't grief keeping me awake. It was something else. Something that felt like the space between breathing in and breathing out. That pause where you decide what happens next. Friday came. And for the first time in months, I woke up before my alarm. First Heritage Bank sat on the corner of Main and Birch, a 2-story brick building with brass door handles and a flagpole out front. The kind of bank where the tellers know your name. Grandma had banked here her entire adult life. I arrived at 9:05. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. A woman in a navy blazer approached me before I reached the counter. "Ms. Hartley? I'm Patricia Cole. We spoke on the phone." She led me to a desk near the back. I handed her my driver's license. She compared it to something on her screen, typed, compared again. She asked me to sign a card. I signed. She compared that too. "Everything matches," she said. "If you'll follow me." We went through a door, down a short hallway lined with framed photos of Millbrook's Main Street from the 1940s, and into a room I'd never seen before. Vault room, low ceiling, fluorescent lights humming, walls lined floor to ceiling with small metal doors, each one numbered in brass. The air was cool and dry and smelled like nothing, like climate control and time standing still. Patricia stopped in front of 1177. She used a master key. The small door swung open with a sound like a sigh. Inside was a flat metal drawer, about the size of a shoebox lid. She pulled it out and set it on a narrow table against the wall. "Take as long as you need," she said. "I'll be right outside." The door clicked shut behind her. I was alone. I looked down at the drawer. Inside, there was only one thing. A manila envelope, letter-sized, thick enough to hold a few sheets of paper, sealed with the flap tucked in, not glued, as if Grandma had wanted it to be easy to open when the time came, her handwriting on the front in blue ballpoint. "For Diana, when you're ready." I pulled out the chair, sat down, picked up the envelope. It weighed almost nothing. Grandma's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. The same careful cursive from every birthday card, every grocery list taped to her fridge, every note she tucked into my lunchbox when I was small. I broke the seal. Inside the envelope were 3 items: a handwritten letter, a bank document, and a folded piece of heavy paper that turned out to be a deed. I read the letter first. The paper was cream-colored, slightly yellowed at the edges. Dated March 14th, 1998. Grandma's handwriting, small, slanted to the right, every letter connected. "Dear Diana, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and someone from the bank has found you. I hope you've had a good life. I hope you're kind. I believe you will be. I'm writing this because I know my daughter. I love Connie. But I also know her. She has always wanted what isn't hers. When your grandfather died, she asked about his watch before the funeral was over. She borrowed $8,000 from me in 1996 and never mentioned it again. Not a word, not a payment. I don't know what she'll do when I'm gone. But I know she won't be fair to you. So I'm making sure you have something she can't touch. What's in this envelope is yours. Legally. Completely. Gerald Fenn can explain everything. I wish I could have told you about this while I was alive, but I wanted you to grow up without depending on it. I wanted you to be strong on your own first. And you are. I know you are. You were always the one who showed up, sweetheart, and you always will be. All my love, Grandma. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. The vault room was cold and silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me. Somewhere past the walls, I could hear the faint murmur of the bank lobby. Grandma knew. In 1998, when I was 6 years old, and she was buying me ice cream in this same building, she already knew exactly what my mother would do. I wiped my face and picked up the second document. A certificate of deposit, issued by Shenandoah Valley Savings Bank in March of 1998. $25,000, deposited by Evelyn R. Marsh, titled in the name of Diana R. Hartley. 28 years of compound interest. A note paperclip to the certificate in Gerald Fenn's handwriting estimated the current value between $55,000 and $65,000. I read the number 3 times. The third item was a deed, a piece of property, 1.2 acres of land on the outskirts of Millbrook, purchased by Evelyn R. Marsh in 1985 and transferred via quitclaim deed to Diana R. Hartley in 1998. Recorded with the county clerk, legal, final. Tucked behind the deed was a handwritten note on a post-it, POD account at Valley Federal Credit Union, beneficiary, Diana R. Hartley, Balance approximately $40,000, account number below. I sat with these papers in my lap in a bank vault, and the numbers didn't make sense to me. Not because they were complicated, but because they were real. This was more than my mother's share of Grandma's house. This was a life raft that had been sitting underwater for 28 years, waiting for me to need it. Patricia Cole knocked softly and opened the door. "Are you all right, Miss Hartley?" I looked up. My face was wet, but I was smiling in a way I hadn't smiled in months. "My grandmother," I said. "She planned all of this." Patricia nodded, the way bank employees do when they've seen families come apart over money, and recognized the rare moment when someone has been loved well. I gathered the papers, slid them carefully back into the manila envelope, and reached for my phone. Gerald Fenn answered on the first ring. "Mr. Fenn?" I opened the box. Gerald Fenn's office was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town estate lawyer who'd been practicing for 40 years. Wood paneling, a leather chair behind the desk with a cracked seat cushion, framed diplomas from the University of Virginia. He was tall, white-haired, and wore a tie even though it was a Friday afternoon in January. "Sit down, Ms. Hartley." I spread the contents of the envelope on his desk. The letter, the CD, the deed, the post-it with the credit union account. He put on his glasses and looked at each one, though I had the sense he already knew what they said. "Everything here is valid," he said. "The certificate of deposit, the deed, the payable on death account, all of them are outside your grandmother's probate estate. They were established in your name or with you as the designated beneficiary before her death. Your mother has no legal claim to any of it." I exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. "Evelyn came to me in 1997, Fenn said. He took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "She sat in that same chair. She said, 'My daughter is going to take everything when I die. I need you to make sure my granddaughter has a future.' We spent 6 months setting this up. Why didn't she tell me? She wanted you to live your life without waiting for an inheritance. Her words, not mine." He paused. "She also asked me not to contact you directly. She said the bank would reach out when the lease neared expiration, and when you called me, I'd know you were ready." He folded his hands. "Do you want me to inform your mother, or would you prefer to handle this yourself?" I thought about Saturday, the dining table, the consent papers, my mother's voice. "You can't handle it." My mother called a family meeting to humiliate me. I think the family deserves to hear the truth. My grandmother kept this secret for 28 years. 28 years of paying that rental fee year after year without saying a word. I keep wondering, what was she thinking every time she watched me grow up? Every time she held my hand on that porch? If you have someone in your life who loved you that quietly, who protected you without you ever knowing, drop a heart in the comments and stay with me. Because what comes next is when my mother found out. My mother had scheduled the signing for the following Sunday. Same house, same dining table, same cast, Ruth, Tammy, the Culpepper cousins. She'd sent a follow-up text to everyone. "Bring ID. We'll make this quick." She expected signatures. She expected compliance. She expected everyone to fall in line the way they always had. I arrived 10 minutes late. On purpose. I wanted everyone seated. I wanted the room full. When I walked through the front door, my mother was standing at the head of the table with her documents fanned out and a pen in her hand. Ruth sat in the same corner. Tammy was beside her, arms crossed. Gary and his wife were across the table, looking uncomfortable. My mother looked up and saw me. Then she saw the man behind me. Gerald Fenn stepped into the dining room in a gray suit and a blue tie, carrying a leather briefcase. "Who is this?" my mother said. "This is Mr. Fenn," I said. "Grandma's attorney." The room shifted. Tammy sat forward. Ruth's hand dropped from her mouth. Gary's wife stopped fidgeting with her phone. My mother blinked. "Mom didn't have an attorney." "She did," Gerald Fenn said. He set his briefcase on the table beside my mother's documents. "For 20 years. I watched my mother's face. The confidence drained from it in stages. First confusion, then something that looked like calculation, then something close to fear. She straightened her shoulders. Well, I don't know what this is about, but we're here to sign. I'm not here to fight, Mom, I said. My voice was even, quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a room. I'm here to share what Grandma actually wanted. I opened my bag and set the manila envelope on the table. I pulled the letter from the envelope, unfolded it, and read aloud. Dear Diana, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and someone from the bank has found you. My mother's mouth opened. No sound came out. I kept reading. Steady, clear. Every word in Grandma's handwriting, every word I'd memorized in the 3 days since I first read them in that vault room. I love Connie, but I also know her. She has always wanted what isn't hers. Ruth covered her mouth with her hand. Tammy was staring at my mother with an expression I'd never seen on her face, something between shock and recognition, as if she was watching a puzzle she'd been working on for years suddenly complete itself. Gary had pushed his chair back from the table. His wife had set down her phone and was gripping the edge of the table. She borrowed $8,000 from me in 1996 and never mentioned it again. My mother's hand was flat on the table, pressing down hard. Her knuckles were white. I could see the tendons in her wrist standing out like cables. I read the rest. About Grandpa's watch. About Grandma not knowing what Connie would do, but knowing she wouldn't be fair. About Gerald Fenn. I finished the letter and set it down on the table, face up, so everyone could see the handwriting. So everyone could see the date. March 14th, 1998. 28 years ago. Then I laid out the certificate of deposit, the deed, and the account information, one at a time, in a row, like cards in a hand that had been dealt a long time ago and was only now being played. Grandma opened a safe deposit box in my name in 1998, I said. These were inside, a CD worth over $60,000, a parcel of land, and a payable on death account worth $40,000, all in my name, all legal. Gerald Fenn spoke without raising his voice. These assets were established outside of Mrs. Marsh's probate estate. Ms. Hartley is the sole legal owner. They cannot be contested. My mother stood up. Her chair scraped the hardwood. That's fraud. She was manipulated. Mom had dementia. Evelyn established these in 1998, Fenn said. She was 56 years old and in full mental capacity. I have documentation of that, signed by her physician. The room was silent. My mother stood there, gripping the back of her chair. This isn't fair, she said. I am her daughter. I deserve... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Mom, I said. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, not with sadness, with fury. You took everything from Grandma's house. You sold Grandpa's ring. You told this family I wasn't capable of handling anything. I kept my voice low, slow. I chose every word the way Grandma used to choose her stitches when she was knitting, deliberately, one at a time. And Grandma knew, 28 years ago, that you would do exactly this. You ungrateful? I'm not ungrateful. I held her gaze. I'm done being silent. I turned to face the room. Ruth was crying, quietly, pressing a tissue to her face. Tammy had her hand over her chest, breathing hard, the way you breathe when you're trying not to say something you'll regret. Gary was staring at the documents on the table, shaking his head slowly. His wife had put her hand on his arm. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said. But I want you all to know, Grandma was clear about what she wanted, and she made sure it couldn't be taken. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the mantel, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a car passing on the road outside. Ruth stood up. She crossed the room and put her arms around me. She held on tight, tighter than she'd held me at the funeral, tighter than she'd held me at the house clean-out. And I let her. Over her shoulder I saw Tammy nod, once, with tears running down her face. Gary pressed his lips together and gave me a look that said what his mouth couldn't. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. My mother sat down. The color was gone from her face. Her mouth was slightly open. For the first time in my memory, in 34 years of life with this woman, she had nothing to say. No story to spin. No version of events where she was the hero. No tears to perform. Grandma's letter was lying on the table in front of her, in handwriting she recognized as well as I did, and every word in it was the truth she'd spent decades making sure no one would see. I gathered the documents and slid them back into the envelope. I looked at Gerald Fenn. He gave a small nod. "Mr. Fenn will handle everything from here," I said. I walked to the front door, opened it, stepped outside, and for the first time, I didn't look back. The week after that Sunday, the phone started ringing. Not mine, my mother's. Ruth called me on Tuesday. 3 of us pulled out, she said. Gary, his wife, and one of the cousins from Culpeper. They told Connie they wouldn't sign her paperwork. What did she say? She called Gary ungrateful. He hung up on her. Without the family's consent, my mother couldn't position herself as sole executor. The probate court would appoint someone neutral, a third-party administrator, to handle the estate. My mother would get her legal share of the house proceeds, but she wouldn't get to control the process. And in a small town like Millbrook, losing control was the same as losing face. My mother called me 7 times that week. I didn't answer. The voicemail started angry and ended desperate. Monday. Diana, this is your mother. You had no right to embarrass me like that. Wednesday. You turned the family against me. Are you happy now? Friday. Diana, please, we can work this out. I need help with some bills. She didn't say sorry, not once. She said she needed help with bills. I saved the voicemails. Then I closed the app and made dinner. That Saturday, Ruth told me something else. Word had spread beyond the family. Grandma had been a fixture in Millbrook for 4 decades. Her church friends, her neighbors, the women she played bridge with every Thursday. 3 of them had heard what happened at the family meeting, and 2 of them had called Connie directly. One of them, a woman named Pauline who'd been Grandma's closest friend, left a message that Ruth played for me. Evelyn always said Connie would pull something. I guess she was right. My mother didn't answer that call either. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell anyone at school. The first thing I did with the certificate of deposit was pay off my student loans. $32,000. A debt I'd been carrying since my 20s, making minimum payments every month for 12 years while teaching other people's children how to read. I'd done the math once. At the rate I was paying, I would have been 53 by the time the balance hit 0. I drove to the credit union with the paperwork Gerald Fenn had prepared. The teller processed it without fanfare. She typed some numbers, printed a receipt, smiled and said, "Congratulations." I walked out with a 0 balance for the first time in my adult life, and sat in my car in the parking lot and just breathed. In and out, slow. The way you breathe when a weight you've been carrying for so long you forgot it was there finally lifts. The remaining money from the CD I put into savings, an emergency fund, the kind of cushion I'd never had, the kind of thing that separates I can handle a car repair from I don't know how I'm going to eat this week. For the first time in my life, an unexpected expense wasn't a crisis. It was just an expense. The payable on death account, $40,000, I left untouched. For now. For whatever came next. And the land. On a Saturday in early March, I drove out to the 1.2 acres on the edge of Millbrook. I'd looked it up on the county tax map. It was a rectangular parcel bordered by an old fence line and a creek on the south side. Open field, wildflowers in summer, a single oak tree near the road. I recognized it the moment I pulled over. Grandma used to bring me here for picnics when I was small. We'd spread a blanket under that oak tree and eat sandwiches, and she'd point out birds. I hadn't been back in 20 years. She'd bought this land in 1985, 7 years before I was born. I stood there in the cold, looking at the field, and remembered her saying once, I must have been 8 or 9. Someday you'll have a place of your own, sweetheart. She'd already bought it. She just didn't tell me. My mother's lake house went on the market in April, Ruth told me. She'd driven past it and seen the for sale sign at the end of the driveway. A quick search online confirmed it. Listed at $289,000. The same property my mother had been financing for years with money she didn't have. The math was simple. Without the windfall she'd been expecting from Grandma's estate, the jewelry she could sell, the Wedgwood she could consign, the house proceeds she could control, my mother didn't have enough to keep up with her debts. The $47,000 in credit card balances, the mortgage on a lake house she used maybe 6 weekends a year. She'd gambled on inheriting her way out of a hole, and Grandma had quietly made sure the biggest chips were off the table. I didn't feel joy. I want to be clear about that. I watched my mother lose her lake house the way you watch a fire burn itself out, with a heavy, tired kind of attention. There was no satisfaction in it, just the blunt fact that actions have consequences, even when you've spent your whole life dodging them. My mother told people I'd turned the family against her. She told her co-workers at the real estate office that I'd hired a lawyer to steal from her. She tried to rewrite the story, the way she always did, but the letter was out there now. Grandma's words, Grandma's handwriting, and the people who had sat in that dining room and heard me read it, they remembered. One of my older cousins called my mother in late April. I heard about it from Tammy. "You sold Bob's ring, Connie," he said. "Evelyn's been dead 3 months and you already sold her husband's ring." My mother hung up on him. Spring came slowly to Millbrook that year. Dogwoods blooming late. Mornings still cold enough for a jacket. Ruth and Tammy started coming for dinner on Wednesdays. My apartment was small. We ate at the kitchen table with our knees touching, but nobody minded. Ruth brought wine. Tammy brought bread from the bakery on Main Street. I cooked. Simple things. Soup, pasta, the kind of meals Grandma used to make. One evening, Ruth set down her fork and said, "Your grandmother and I talked about this, you know, about Connie, about what would happen." What did she say? She said, "Ruth, Connie will take everything, but Diana will be all right. I've already made sure of it." Ruth smiled. I didn't know the details. She wouldn't tell me. But she had this look. You know the one. That quiet look she got when she'd made up her mind about something and nothing on earth was going to change it. I knew that look. I'd seen it on the porch, at the kitchen table, in the way she held her coffee mug with both hands and stared out the window like she was calculating something only she could see. Tammy had been scanning old photographs from Ruth's collection. Ruth had kept copies of some family pictures over the years, not the same as the albums my mother took, but enough. Tammy brought them on a thumb drive. Birthdays, holidays, a photo of Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day, 1962, standing outside a church in a dress she'd sewn herself. I printed that one and taped it to my refrigerator, next to the bank appointment card I still hadn't thrown away. "She always said you were the best part of this family, Diana," Ruth said. "Now I understand why." In May, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. A letter, in a plain white envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. I opened it at my kitchen table. 1 page, handwritten. "Diana, I'm still your mother. I made mistakes. Can we talk? Mom." I read it twice, set it on the table, drank my coffee. There was no apology in that letter, no acknowledgement. I made mistakes, is what people say when they want to skip past what they did and get to the part where you forgive them. My mother wasn't asking to repair something. She was asking for access. She was alone. The lake house sold, the family at a distance, the narrative she'd built for 30 years, dismantled by a letter from a dead woman in a bank vault. I understood loneliness. I'd lived in it for months after Grandma died. But I also understood the difference between loneliness and accountability. I wrote back, longhand, on a sheet of lined paper from the pack I use for my students' writing assignments. "Mom, I love you, But I can't have a relationship built on you pretending none of this happened. When you're ready to be honest, not about what you need, but about what you did, I'll be here. Diana. I sealed it, stamped it, drove to the post office, dropped it in the blue box on the corner. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't expect one. My mother might never change. She might spend the rest of her life telling anyone who'll listen that her daughter and her dead mother conspired against her. I couldn't control that. I could only control the door, and I wasn't closing it. I was just done holding it open for someone who kept slamming it in my face. One Saturday in late May, I drove out to the land. The field had come alive. Wildflowers, Queen Anne's lace and black-eyed Susans, and something purple I didn't know the name of, had pushed up through the grass and filled the whole acre. The oak tree had leafed out, its canopy so thick and green it looked like a painting. The creek along the south fence was running clear, catching the morning light. I parked on the gravel shoulder, took the cracked coffee mug from the passenger seat. I'd started bringing it with me places, the way some people carry a photograph, and walked through the gate. Under the oak tree, I poured coffee from my thermos into Grandma's mug and sat in the grass. The morning was warm. Bees worked the wildflowers. A cardinal was going off in the top of the tree like it owned the place. Somewhere across the field, a tractor hummed on a neighboring farm. I took the letter from my jacket pocket. I'd been carrying it for weeks, folded into a square, tucked against my chest like a talisman. The creases were getting soft. The ink was starting to ghost where my thumb touched the same words over and over. You were always the one who showed up, sweetheart, and you always will be. I read it one more time. Slowly this time, hearing her voice in every word. Then I folded it back into its square and slid it into my pocket. I looked at the field, at the wildflowers, at the tree Grandma and I had sat under when I was small enough to fit in her lap, when she'd point at a bluebird and whisper its name like she was introducing me to a friend. She'd bought this land in 1985, before I existed, before she knew I'd be born, before she knew what kind of person I'd become. She bought it and held it and put my name on it and never said a word. She just trusted that someday I'd be standing right here, in this exact spot, understanding everything she couldn't say out loud. I showed up, Grandma, I said, like I always do. I drank my coffee. The cardinals sang. The creek ran. The wind moved through the oak leaves and made a sound like someone shuffling pages. She couldn't protect me from everything, but she'd made sure I could protect myself. If you're watching this and someone in your family keeps telling you that you're not enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not worthy enough, I want you to hear something. There's probably someone who sees you, someone who knows exactly what you're worth, even when the loudest voices in the room are saying otherwise. Maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's an aunt, maybe it's a teacher or a neighbor or a friend who's been watching from the edges, waiting for the moment when you're ready to see yourself the way they see you. My grandmother didn't tell me about that safe deposit box because she wanted me to live my life without leaning on it. She wanted me to become the person she believed I was, on my own. And then, when the time came, she wanted me to know I was never as alone as I thought. I'm not rich. I still teach third grade at Millbrook Elementary. I still live in my one-bedroom apartment. I have a piece of land I haven't built anything on yet. I have a savings account that lets me sleep at night. And I have a cracked coffee mug that I drink from every single morning. The money mattered. I won't pretend it didn't. But the letter mattered more. Because in that letter, my grandmother said the thing I'd needed to hear my whole life. I know her, and I know you, and you are different. My worth isn't measured by the people who underestimate me. It's measured by the ones who planned 28 years ahead just to make sure I'd be okay. And if no one has told you that lately, consider this me telling you now. Someone sees you. Someone already has a plan. You just haven't found the envelope yet. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. If you're rooting for grandmothers who love quietly and fiercely, hit that like button. If you believe in setting boundaries, even when it's the hardest thing you've ever done, subscribe. And if you've lived something like this, if you've got a story about someone who protected you when you didn't even know it, share it in the comments. I read every single one. There's another story waiting for you in the description below. It's about a woman who was underestimated her whole life, until she wasn't. I think you'll like